In non-pandemic times, we would be having this coffee house at a local neighborhood coffee shop, probably like the Laughing Bean or a place on Hastings or on Commercial Drive or on Broadway. But we aren't in normal times, and we have to do things differently. We have to do things differently in this nomination campaign, and certainly all of you know that we have to do things differently in our lives to keep everyone safe. I'm running for the nomination here in Vancouver Hastings because I love this community. It's the community I call home, and I want to protect the people who make this community a home. I moved here when I was in university as an undergrad, a quarter of a century ago, 25 years ago. And I've lived in this community ever since. I started working here in the nonprofit arts world, where in my 20s, I got to meet so many of the artists and the people who are trying to build this community into the arts and cultural scene that it is today. I got involved in community organizing. That's when I met Shane Simpson. And I got involved in the NDP. I was involved in university, but I got more involved when I moved to East Van, because here in East Van and here in Hastings, the issues that the NDP fights for are the issues that matter in our community. So you couldn't avoid it. If you were active in the community here, you were active in the BC NDP and the federal NDP. So I got to work on Jenny Kwan's campaigns. I worked on Libby Davies' campaigns, and I worked on Joy McPhail's campaign, 2001. 2001 is a significant campaign because in that campaign, we only had 2 New Democrat seats left in British Columbia, Jenny Kwan's and Joy McPhail's. And we were really fortunate that out of East Vancouver, we had 2 strong women leaders that held our province together, that we built our movement, 2 versus 77. Those were the numbers in the House. And it was intimidating times for Joy and Jenny, and it was really hard work. And I'm so proud of the work that they did together. And I'm so proud that I was there to support them day in and day out for East Van, because that's what we were representing, but for the province, because that's what we were responsible for the rest of the party and for the movement. Rebuilding and building, those were the things that have defined my life. Rebuilding the NDP with Joy, Jenny, and Carol. Building for the 2017 campaign. The party's never been in better shape. And I want to work on the relationship between the party and the caucus. I am driven by the urgent need on action on pressing issues that matter and that are fundamental to our community. The climate emergency, the overdose crisis, housing and homelessness, racial justice, reconciliation with Indigenous people, and a COVID recovery plan that rebuilds the economy in a way that's fair, sustainable, and works for everyone. And I'm so delighted that you're here with me to talk with me this morning, because I really want to hear from you about the priorities that matter to you as well. So Maria, I do open it up for everyone to join us and join the conversation. Thank you all for being here.
Thanks so much, Raj. And a reminder to everyone on joining us today, there is a button at the bottom of your screen that says Q&A. If you have a question that you would like Raj to address, please go in there and type it in, and I will keep an eye on the Q&A and make sure that Raj addresses your question. I think though, let's open with climate, because I know that many of us, it's been I think the issues that you outlined are really pressing, and there's no shortage of things that we're worried about here in Vancouver Hastings. But I know that, environmental protection and action around the environment and around climate was part of what drove you to become an NDP activist. And I just want to, can you tell us a little bit about what your goals are, if elected, in advancing issues around climate?
Thanks so much, Maria. Indeed, it was environmental protection, as we called it back in the 90s when I got involved with the NDP. The environment and social justice were 2 of the things that brought me into the NDP. And to solve the climate crisis, we have to solve the climate crisis. There'll be no future if we don't. It's that simple. But I think the only way to solve it is to bring everyone along. We can't leave anyone behind. And that's why climate action goes in hand with Indigenous reconciliation, with social justice and economic fairness. I truly believe that.
Thanks, Raj. I agree. Not surprisingly, I think that these issues are obviously not separate issues, and recognizing that how they intersect is really critical for our ability to address them. We do have some questions coming in from participants, and the first one is one that I know you're quite passionate about. It's an issue that I'm personally really driven on as an activist, and that's the overdose crisis. And clearly, we're not doing enough. Too many people every day are still dying. And I wonder if you could speak to, again, what motivates you and what you see as solutions in moving forward and advocating for the many people in Vancouver Hastings who are vulnerable with the poison drug supply that we have right now.
Yeah, it's a question fundamental to our community, and one that comes up when I talk to members. My history with harm reduction, as it was called back in the 1990s, I was a constituency assistant in Jenny Kwan's office in the downtown east side. And so I saw firsthand what it was doing to our community. Back then, we didn't even have needle exchanges. I mean, these were hard things that we worked on in East Vancouver to build. A needle exchange program, trying to get merchants in and around the downtown east side to realize that our streets would be safer if we had a place where people could go and safely inject their drugs so that they wouldn't find needles on their front doors. And the amazing coalition work that Jenny and others did to build the community to get thinking together on these ideas so that we could bring them forward to the province and to the federal government. So that's when I first got involved. And over the years, East Vancouver has led the country, the continent, in how we deal with what was harm reduction. And now the issues are so much greater. You are right, the drug supply is poisoned and people are dying in massive numbers, and we have to save lives. And we know there are ways to do that. People have done a ton of work in British Columbia on safe supply. The Premier has made it clear, as have the chiefs of police, that we need decriminalization, and we have to move forward on those. And this is one of the issues that I am most passionate about, and I will fight so hard for our community to make sure this happens, because the people working on the front lines, they are exhausted, and they are also our healthcare workers, and we're counting on them in the pandemic. And guess what? They're also worried about the climate emergency. These things are all linked together, and people in our community who are doing this important work need the help of our elected officials to get it done. And I'm an action-oriented person, so I intend to get it done.
Thanks, Raj. I mean, as I said, this is for me, you know, I know that you will bring this fight into caucus, into government. And for me, it's one of the critical reasons that you have my support. Moving on to another question here. Public health care obviously is a very fundamental issue, an important issue for New Democrats always, but obviously even more so as we find ourselves in this pandemic and in this crisis. The pandemic has really highlighted our need for strong public health care system to address our health needs. What are your thoughts on how we strengthen public health care so it's sustainable and responsive?
Thank you. To our healthcare workers and our frontline workers, thank you for the work that you've been doing for months and months to keep us safe here in British Columbia. And I was so pleased that the Supreme Court last week struck down private healthcare. New Democrats brought in healthcare. New Democrats will protect healthcare. And here in British Columbia, you can see the differences that we're already making. We learned a lot from the pandemic, and we know that some of the things that were the most difficult to deal with in the pandemic were things that the BC Liberals brought to us. The change that they made in people had to work more than one job to make a living. The changes that they made and the largest layoff of women in BC history who worked in healthcare absolutely was part and parcel of the crisis that happened in long-term care homes earlier this spring. And all those people should not have died if the BC Liberals had been more careful about the way that they structured healthcare and realized that you couldn't have workers going from one facility to another in a situation like this. So I'm really pleased that we made some changes so that those workers are protected and the people living in those care homes are protected. And it's more important than ever to have New Democrats in government fighting for public health care. We know what the BC Liberals will do. We know what the Conservatives are doing around the country. And so I pledge to you, just like any New Democrat, public health care is the fighting reason that we are a political party, and it will remain a fighting reason when I'm an MLA, should I be lucky enough to be nominated as the candidate in Vancouver Hastings. Because the overdose crisis, the pandemic, we need our frontline workers and we need to take care of them.
Thanks, Raj. The questions are coming in, which is great. If there's people joining us that still have questions they want to have answered, please feel free to write them in the Q&A. I'm going to go to another question from another Vancouver Hastings member. We touched on this a little bit, I think, in some of our opening remarks, but what can we do in East Vancouver to support reconciliation and move that and advance that and move that forward?
Absolutely. We move reconciliation forward each day in our own lives. That's the most fundamental way to move reconciliation forward. If you're in a community, if you're in an organization, if you're in a neighborhood group, and there are not Indigenous people sitting at the table, then you have to ask yourself why. Because there are lots of active Indigenous people in our party, in our movement, in our community. And if you don't know how to connect with them, then find ways to reach out to people who are connected with them. I'm very pleased to have the support of people like Carleen Thomas and Stuart Phillip. And so if you yourself are interested in doing reconciliation work and would like to reach out to people who are doing this work, the Musqueam, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh all have protocol offices that you can work with. They will connect people with you, to you in your community and do this. I think this is vital work. I think reconciliation does happen block by block, community by community, and it's all of our responsibilities to move it forward.
Thank you, Raj. Thank you. I'm going to move on to another question here, also connected to the climate crisis. I agree with you about the need to recognize a connection with other issues. I'm concerned about LNG, and we need to address these issues, and we need to pour much more energy into developing truly sustainable energy development. What are your thoughts on this?
Like I said, environmental protection is what got me into the NDP in the first place. And over the years, I fought really hard on climate action. I fought the Trans Mountain Pipeline with the Tsleil-Waututh. I've done a lot of work on these issues with Grand Chief Stuart Phillip. I'm really proud to have his strong endorsement. And trust me, Grand Chief Stuart Phillip doesn't give his endorsement unless he can count on you to stand up for the environment and Indigenous rights.
Thank you. The next question is one that I know we all grapple with and have for a long time. The question is about how many there's too many people in our community who are unhoused, who don't have homes. I want you to address that, but I want to broaden it to a conversation around also affordability and housing insecurity. And I think that even there's people, we know there's too many people who are unhoused altogether. I know you've been a renter, a tenant for a really long time, and I do feel like there is the spectrum. Even many of us who are housed are still do not have the level of security that that we should in a community that in a province as wealthy as ours. So I guess on the spectrum of both people with urgent needs who are on the street right now and are unhoused, and also into a into renters, and what more could we be doing to ensure that there is housing security for a wide range of people in this community?
Thank you, Maria. On housing and homelessness, certainly in our community, we felt and are still feeling the impact of the 16 years of Liberal government that didn't build a stitch of housing, of social housing. We had a federal government that got out of the housing business altogether in the mid-90s, and our community has never recovered, and British Columbia has never recovered. When the NDP government got into power in 2017, one of the fundamental things that they started doing was rebuilding social housing after 16 years of not having any. And so thousands and thousands of units have been built around the province, but it's not enough, and we absolutely need to do more. And some of the housing that now have in Vancouver, especially after the pandemic, are hotels, much like the old SRO model, which does get people off the streets, but it's not sufficient for making people a home. So we have to continue the programs that we built. We have to continue working with the City of Vancouver on the land that they have for the province to build this housing. And we have to continue fighting to get the federal government back in the housing business. And I think in these pandemic times, that is more important than ever for the federal government to make that a priority. And on the rental housing and folks who rent, I know that people who rent come from a wide, diverse backgrounds. Not everyone rents because they can't afford a home. A lot of people rent because they'd like to have a home, and that's the only choice they have. But we don't even have enough diversity in market housing in this town. There's very limited stock for rental housing, and that's why rents are so sky high. There's absolutely more that the city, the province, and the feds can do to be able to build market housing. And there's lots that we can do with bonus amenity and working with developers and get more options in the market for people, and also more diversity in the kind of housing that we have. So there's rental family housing as well as one-bedroom suites and studios. As a city, we are terribly behind many parts of the world who have much more robust housing programs than we do. And if we don't solve this, our inner city is going to be hollowed out of people who work here but can't afford to live here. And I think we're already finding that more and more. And I think in these pandemic times, it's even more of an issue. So more housing, all kinds of it, and there's lots we can leverage to make it happen.
Thanks, Raj. I know we've touched on the pandemic and the impact of it in several ways, but I want to, there's a question that I think is important around economic recovery, and in particular, the small businesses in Vancouver Hastings, and the vibrancy of the small businesses, and how much that is part of our community, and how many businesses are struggling right now. Can you speak a little bit about economic recovery and how we ensure support for many of the businesses that are fundamental to our community?
Thanks, Maria. And I just want to give out a shout out to Carmen Louie. I think who was joining the Zoom this morning. And you may have seen Carmen on the website and in my leaflet. Carmen works at Donald's Market, my local grocery store. And so many of us who live in East Van have our favorite local grocery store or restaurant. And over these last few months, I have seen my neighbors who run businesses and who work on businesses struggling with the shutdown that happened earlier in this year, and then struggling with applying for CERB or applying for the various grants that are available. And all of them have told me that they need more help in moving this forward. They wish they had a better relationship with the city. They wish people were being more creative about the ways that we could revitalize our neighborhoods and use pandemic and the rebuilding of the economy to have more things in our neighborhood, because people are closer to home and people do want to support their local businesses, and people aren't making as many trips out to box stores in the suburbs. And we have to, and commercial rents have been raised with me time and time again. And I think there's a lot that we can do to make sure that our small businesses and our local strips here in Vancouver Hastings have the support from their local government officials to get everything they can to make sure that their shops stay open in our neighborhoods.
Thanks, Raj. Yeah, Donald, I mean, I think that there's nobody that lives in Vancouver Hastings that doesn't have an affection for Carmen and Donald's Market. So appreciate that shout out. I just want to, I think we're almost running out of time here, and I do want to sort of invite a last round of questions. If anybody has something they'd like Raj to address that she hasn't yet. I know for me, one of the things, we've talked about affordability a little bit in terms of economic recovery and small businesses as well as housing. But I know something that you and I have talked about before that I think is strikes at the heart of a lot of our work, and why we're motivated to do the work we do. And that's around kids in Vancouver Hastings, and not just in our school system, but making sure kids are supported. We know there's high levels of poverty in this community, and you know, and we also know that the more that we can support and invest in children early on, the better the social determinants of health and outcomes. So can you just talk for a minute about kids in the riding, and how many, you know, the struggles that many of them are facing, and the work that you would do in supporting them going forward?
Thanks, Maria. I know that every day in Vancouver Hastings, kids go to school hungry. That is a fact of life in Vancouver Hastings. And kids go to school hungry because they come from homes that are not seeing a fair distribution from our world. They are struggling. They are struggling with paying their rent. They are struggling about making choices about paying bills or buying groceries. And they don't want to send their kids hungry to school, but that's what happens. And so we have to, school is a safe place for so many children in Vancouver Hastings. And over the last few months, when people haven't been in school, those kids have been suffering, because school is their network, it's their support, and it's a safe place. And so taking care of kids in Vancouver Hastings, all kids in Vancouver Hastings, from the ones who go hungry to the ones who have lots of support at home. And I know that over the last few months, it's been really tough on parents as well. And I know that they're concerned about what going back to school means. And I know Maria, and I know Jamie's on the line. I mean, I know folks have had to take their kids to Children's for COVID tests because people are being very careful, and you can't be in the classroom if you have sniffles. And so I know the incredible stress that this is bringing on all parents in the school system. And I know we have a lot of work to do and more investment to make up for many, many lost years of the Liberals who didn't provide those kinds of supports or resources for all kids in schools. And so I pledge to you that I really want to make sure that kids are not going to school in our constituency hungry. And we have to do more in our schools, and we have to do more in our community to support those families so that everyone does get a strong start to life, because that's better for all of us in the community, and that builds the community that we want. And we're New Democrats. This is the raison d'etre that we do this for, right? It's supporting our kids, it's building the next generation, and it's having a world that we're proud to leave to them.